In the peaceful yet bustling village of Gatari, nestled between the lush hills and the river's edge, lived a young girl named Amina. She was an orphan, having lost both her parents at a young age to illness, but she had not lost her spirit. Amina was known throughout the village for her wisdom, her delicate hands that could weave the finest cloth, and her kind heart that was always willing to help those in need. Her mother's warm smile and her father's sharp mind had left their marks on her. Even the elders admired her sense of maturity despite her youth. However, Amina's life was not one of comfort or ease. After the death of her parents, she was left in the care of her stepmother, Mwanza, a woman whose cruelty was only known behind the closed doors of their small home. To the villagers, Mwanza appeared to be a woman of good standing, well-spoken, respectable, and always offering a helping hand. But to Amina, Mwanza was a living nightmare. From the moment her parents had passed, Mwanza began to treat Amina as nothing more than a servant. She would force Amina to wake before the first light, making her fetch water from the distant stream, tend to the fields, and care for the house while Mwanza and her 2 daughters lounged in the shade. Her stepmother's daughters, Yaya and Nuru, were much like their mother, vain and lazy, always mocking Amina for her simple clothes and endless chores. One day, as the sun set behind the hills, Mwanza sat near the fire outside their home, a glimmer of cunning in her eye. She had been harboring a wicked jealousy for years. Amina was growing into a young woman, more beautiful and more loved by the villagers than her own daughters. The gifts that Amina's parents had left her, her beauty, intelligence, and kind nature, made Mwanza's own daughters seem plain and unremarkable in comparison. This, Mwanza could not tolerate. In that moment, as the flames flickered, Mwanza devised a sinister plan to rid herself of Amina once and for all. She would send Amina on an impossible errand, one that would lead her straight into danger. Mwanza's lips curled into a sly smile as she thought of how clever her plan was. The next morning, Mwanza awoke Amina with a sickly sweet voice, unlike her usual stern tone. "Amina, my dear," she said, "I have something very important for you to do today. I am feeling unwell, and the only thing that can cure me is the golden berries from the heart of the forbidden forest." Amina stood still, her hands trembling slightly. She had heard the stories about the forbidden forest since she was a child. It was a place of great mystery and danger, filled with wild creatures and spirits that protected its sacred land. Many had ventured into its depths, but few had returned. The villagers feared the forest, calling it cursed. Yet here was her stepmother, asking her to enter this very place. Seeing Amina's hesitation, Mwanza's tone grew harsher. "If you care about this household and about me, you will not disobey. You must fetch the golden berries, or else I shall grow weaker by the day. Do you want me to die because of your selfishness?" Amina, though filled with dread, could not refuse. Her heart, kind as it was, could not bear the thought of being the cause of someone's suffering, even if it was her cruel stepmother. She nodded, her voice quiet but steady. "I will go." And so, Amina packed a small cloth bag with what little she could carry, some bread, a gourd of water, and a thin blanket. As she prepared to leave, Mwanza watched her closely, the wicked smile barely hidden behind her falsely concerned expression. "Be safe, dear," she said mockingly, knowing full well that Amina would likely never return. Amina set off just as the morning sun began to climb the sky. The village, as always, was coming to life with the sound of children playing and women chatting by the river. A few villagers waved to her as she passed, unaware of the dangerous task she had been given. Amina kept her head down, her mind racing with thoughts of the journey ahead. She could still hear the stories about the forest echoing in her head, tales of the enormous trees whose branches blocked out the sun, of the strange creatures that roamed the undergrowth, and of the ancient spirits said to guard its treasures. As she approached the edge of the village, the warm and familiar sounds faded, replaced by the eerie stillness of the path that led to the forbidden forest. Her heart pounded in her chest as she saw the towering trees ahead. The forest seemed to have a life of its own, its dark canopy stretching far into the sky, blocking the light and casting long, menacing shadows on the ground. Amina paused for a moment at the entrance, her breath quick and shallow. She could feel the weight of the task ahead of her, but she reminded herself of her parents' teachings. Her father had always told her, "No matter how great the challenge, Never let fear cloud your mind. There is always a way through. She took a deep breath and stepped forward into the forest. With each step, the air grew cooler, and the light from the sun grew dimmer. The sounds of the village were now far behind her, and all that remained was the rustling of leaves and the occasional distant call of an unknown creature. The path ahead was unclear, but Amina pressed on, determined to find the golden berries and return before nightfall. What Amina did not know was that the forest had its own plans for her. Though dangerous, it was also a place of great wisdom, and those who entered with a pure heart were often met with unexpected help. As she ventured deeper, she heard the soft whisper of a voice on the wind, but before she could understand what it meant, she felt a shift in the air around her. The forest was watching, waiting to see what kind of person had dared to enter its domain. As Amina ventured deeper into the forbidden forest, the air around her seemed to grow heavier, more charged. The towering trees closed in like silent sentinels, their thick branches intertwining to block out the sun. Only thin shafts of light pierced the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. The deeper she went, the more she realized just how vast and mysterious this forest truly was. Every step she took was filled with a sense of danger, but her heart remained determined. Amina had no map, no guidance, only her instincts to rely on. The stories she had heard about the forbidden forest filled her mind as she walked. Tales of enchanted creatures, of great beasts, and of strange spirits who roamed the woodlands, testing those who dared enter their domain. She knew she had to be cautious, for the forest was said to have a life and will of its own. The path beneath her feet began to shift, becoming rocky and uneven. The trees rustled with the whispers of the wind, and the occasional call of a distant bird echoed through the stillness. But it wasn't the birds or the trees that unsettled Amina. It was the strange feeling that she was being watched. More than once she turned to glance behind her, only to find nothing but the dense thicket. Hours passed, and Amina grew tired. Her legs ached from the uneven terrain, and the weight of the task ahead began to press on her heart. She paused for a moment, leaning against the rough bark of a tree, catching her breath. She looked around and realized just how far she had come. The village was long behind her, and there was no turning back now. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shifted. Startled, Amina stepped forward, but as she did, she heard a voice, soft at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. It was ancient, gentle, yet filled with a strange power. "Why have you come here, child?" the voice asked, echoing through the trees. Amina froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was no one in sight. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The forest remained silent for a moment, and then the voice returned, this time louder, more insistent. "I ask again, why have you come here, to the heart of the forbidden forest?" Amina swallowed her fear and spoke, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "I was sent by my stepmother. She told me to find the golden berries that grow deep within this forest. She said it's the only cure for her illness." The forest seemed to hum with life, the wind picking up as the trees swayed gently. Then, out of the shadows, a figure began to emerge. It was not human, but something else, something ancient and wise. A large, majestic spirit animal, in the form of a leopard, appeared before her. Its golden eyes glowed in the dim light, watching her closely, as if weighing her words. "The golden berries," the leopard spirit said, its voice smooth like silk, "are not easily found. Many have sought them, but few have returned, and those who did were not the same as they once were. Why should I help you, Amina?" Amina stood her ground, though her heart raced with fear and awe. She could feel the power radiating from the spirit, but she also knew she had no choice but to continue her journey. "I don't seek the berries for myself," Amina replied. "My stepmother, Mwanza, told me that only these berries can cure her. I must find them." The spirit tilted its head, its eyes narrowing. "And do you trust this Mwanza? Does she care for you as a mother should?" Amina hesitated, the question hitting a painful nerve. She's not like my real mother. She doesn't care for me, but I still have to do what is right." The leopard spirit stepped closer, its enormous form towering over Amina. "You have a kind heart, Amina, but you are naive. The golden berries do not exist to cure sickness. Your stepmother has deceived you." Amina's eyes widened, her heart sinking. "What do you mean? She told me, she sent you here hoping you would never return," the spirit interrupted, its voice filled with quiet authority. "This forest is dangerous, filled with tests and trials that challenge the soul. She does not expect you to survive." Amina's chest tightened with shock and betrayal. Her mind raced as she tried to process the truth. Could her stepmother really have plotted to send her to her death? The cold realization settled into her bones. It all made sense now. The sudden kindness, the impossible task. Mwanza had wanted her gone. "But why?" Amina asked, her voice barely a whisper. The spirit gazed at her with something akin to pity. "Because your light shines too bright. She fears you, child. She fears what you will become. A woman stronger, wiser, and more beloved than she could ever be." Amina's heart ached, but she refused to let the tears fall. She had always known deep down that Mwanza's love was false, but hearing it confirmed by the spirit left her feeling both vulnerable and determined. She would not let her stepmother's wickedness break her. She had come this far, and she would not be defeated so easily. "I don't care about her plan," Amina said, her voice firm. "I will survive this forest, and I will return." The spirit's eyes gleamed with approval. "You are brave, Amina, and your heart is pure, but bravery alone is not enough. To leave this forest, you must pass the tests that lie ahead." Amina nodded, determination etched in her face. "I'm ready." The spirit circled her slowly, its massive paws silent on the forest floor. "The first test is not of strength, but of the mind. Ahead you will find a path split into 3. Only one will lead you to safety. The others will lead you to ruin. Trust your instincts and perhaps you will find the right way." With that, the leopard spirit faded back into the shadows, leaving Amina alone once more. She stood there for a moment, her heart racing, but then she squared her shoulders. The forest was testing her now, but she would not be afraid. She had come too far to give up now. As Amina pressed forward, the path before her began to change, just as the spirit had said. 3 separate trails now stretched out in front of her, each one shrouded in mystery. She had no way of knowing which was the right one, but she knew she had to choose wisely. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of the forest around her, the rustling leaves, the faint whispers of the wind. She took a deep breath and, trusting her heart, chose the middle path. Amina's heart raced as the ground beneath her feet trembled. The once firm path now felt unstable, as though it might give way at any moment. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The middle path had felt right, but the forest was unpredictable, and she knew her journey was far from over. The trees on either side of the path seemed to close in around her, their branches intertwining above her head. The air grew thicker, and a strange mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around her ankles and creeping up her legs. Amina quickened her pace, her senses on high alert. She could hear faint whispers in the air, but they were too soft to understand, more like echoes of voices long forgotten. Suddenly, the mist thickened, obscuring the path ahead. Amina paused, her heart pounding in her chest. She could barely see a few feet in front of her. For a moment, she considered turning back, but she knew there was no retreat. If she didn't press forward, she would never escape the forest, and her stepmother's cruel plan would succeed. Gathering her courage, Amina continued onward, her steps slow and cautious. The mist clung to her skin like a cold, damp cloak, and the whispers grew louder. She tried to ignore them, focusing on the ground beneath her feet and the path ahead, but the voices were persistent. "She can't make it," one voice whispered, its tone mocking. "She's just a foolish girl," said another, this one colder, filled with malice. Amina gritted her teeth, refusing to be swayed by the voices. She knew they were illusions, tricks of the forest meant to unnerve her. But even so, they tugged at her doubts and fears, feeding on her insecurities. The forest seemed to know her weaknesses, and it was using them against her. The path ahead began to slope downward, leading her deeper into the forest. The mist parted just enough for her to see a small clearing up ahead. Relieved to find an open space, Amina hurried forward. As she stepped into the clearing, the mist vanished completely, and the air cleared. For the first time in what felt like hours, she could see the sky above her, blue and cloudless. In the center of the clearing stood a large ancient tree. Its bark was silver, and its branches stretched high into the sky, covered in shimmering golden leaves. Amina's breath caught in her throat. It was the most beautiful tree she had ever seen. Hanging from its branches were clusters of glowing golden berries. They sparkled like jewels, and Amina knew instinctively that these were the berries her stepmother had sent her to find. Her heart soared with hope. Could it be that her journey was finally over? Had she found the berries after all? But even as the thought crossed her mind, a small voice in the back of her head warned her to be cautious. The forest was filled with deception, and things were rarely as they seemed. Still, Amina's desperation and exhaustion tugged at her. She was so close, closer than she had ever been, and the temptation to take the berries and leave was overwhelming. As she approached the tree, her hand reached out toward one of the glowing clusters. But just as her fingers brushed the berries, the ground beneath her feet shifted once more. A sharp, low growl echoed through the clearing, and Amina froze, her hand hovering inches from the berries. From the shadows at the edge of the clearing, a large figure emerged. It was another spirit, but this one was different from the leopard she had encountered earlier. This spirit took the form of a great wolf, its fur as black as the night, and its eyes glowed red like embers. Its presence radiated power, and its gaze was fixed on Amina with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "Touch those berries," the wolf spirit growled, its voice deep and menacing, "and you will seal your fate." Amina swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She slowly withdrew her hand, taking a step back from the tree. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. The wolf spirit circled her slowly, its eyes never leaving her. "I am the guardian of this forest," it said, "and you, Amina, are walking a dangerous path." Amina stood her ground, though fear gripped her. "I was told to find the golden berries," she explained, her voice steadying. "My stepmother sent me here, saying they would cure her illness." The wolf spirit bared its sharp teeth, letting out a low growl. "Your stepmother is a liar," it said bluntly. "These berries are not meant for her. They are sacred, and those who take them for selfish reasons will face dire consequences." Amina's heart sank. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by the spirit made her feel as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. "So what do I do?" she asked, her voice small. The wolf spirit's eyes softened slightly, though its expression remained stern. "You must pass the true test of the forest, Amina. The berries are a trap, an illusion meant to test your resolve. To leave this place, you must prove that your heart is pure and your mind is sharp. Only then will you find the real way out." Amina took a deep breath, nodding. "What is the test?" she asked. The wolf spirit stepped closer, lowering its massive head to look her directly in the eyes. "The forest will show you your deepest fear," it said quietly. "You must face it without running, without hiding. Only then will you be free." Amina's stomach twisted with dread, but she knew there was no other way. "I'll do it," she said, her voice stronger than before. The wolf spirit nodded approvingly. "Very well, follow me." The spirit turned and began to walk toward the edge of the clearing, and Amina followed, her heart pounding in her chest. As they walked, the trees around them seemed to shift and change, the air growing colder. Amina could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on her, and she knew the real test was about to begin. They entered a dense thicket, and the wolf spirit stopped, turning to face her. "This is where you must face your fear," it said. "Remember, you cannot run, you cannot hide." Amina nodded, though fear gnawed at her insides. She had no idea what she was about to face, but she knew she had to be strong. The wolf spirit faded into the shadows, leaving her alone. The air around her grew still, and the forest fell silent. Amina stood in the center of the thicket, waiting, her heart racing. Suddenly, the trees around her began to shift and warp, and the mist returned, swirling around her like a living thing. Out of the mist, a figure began to emerge, a figure she knew all too well.
It was her stepmother, Mwanza, but twisted and distorted. Her eyes glowed with a cruel light, and her lips curled into a wicked smile. "You think you can escape me, Amina," Mwanza hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "You will never be free." Amina's blood ran cold, but she stood her ground. "You can't control me anymore," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I won't let you." Mwanza laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the forest. "You're nothing, Amina," she spat. Just a helpless, orphaned girl. No one cares about you. No one will ever love you. Amina's heart ached, but she refused to let Mwanza's words break her. You're wrong, she said quietly. I have my own strength and I will survive, without you. The figure of Mwanza sneered, but as Amina stood her ground, the mist began to lift, and the distorted image of her stepmother started to fade. Amina stood in the clearing, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The image of her stepmother had vanished, and the mist that had shrouded the forest was lifting. She felt as though she had passed some test, but deep down, a gnawing feeling told her that the worst was yet to come. She took a moment to steady herself, grateful that she hadn't faltered in the face of her greatest fear. But even as the fog cleared, her instincts told her to stay on guard. The forest had been deceptive before, and she knew she couldn't trust the apparent peace that now surrounded her. Suddenly, a rustling sound behind her snapped her out of her thoughts. She spun around, her eyes scanning the edge of the clearing, where the shadows were thickest. The sound came again, this time louder, as if something, or someone, was moving toward her. Amina clenched her fists, ready for whatever might come. She had faced down the illusion of her stepmother, but this felt different. This wasn't just a test of her courage. There was something tangible in the air, a presence that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. From the shadows, a figure emerged. But this was no spirit or illusion. It was a man, cloaked in a dark, tattered robe, his face hidden beneath a hood. He moved with a strange, fluid grace, his steps barely making a sound on the forest floor. Amina took a step back, her heart racing once again. Who was this stranger, and what did he want? The man stopped a few feet from her, his head tilted slightly to the side as if he were studying her. You've done well to come this far, he said, his voice low and raspy. But the forest has one more challenge for you. Amina's brow furrowed. Who are you? She asked, her voice cautious. And what do you want? The man chuckled softly, though there was no warmth in the sound. I am a servant of the forest, and I am here to make sure you truly deserve to leave this place. He raised a hand, and as he did, the ground beneath Amina's feet began to tremble once more. Before she could react, the earth cracked open, and from the fissure, vines as thick as her arms shot up, wrapping themselves around her legs and arms. Amina gasped, struggling to free herself, but the vines were too strong. They pulled her down, pinning her to the ground as they tightened their grip. The man stepped closer, looming over her. This is the forest's final test, he said, his voice cold. If you can break free, you will prove your worth, but if you cannot... He let the words hang in the air, a dark smile playing on his lips. Amina's heart pounded in her chest as she fought against the vines, but the more she struggled, the tighter they became. Panic began to set in as she realized that she was completely trapped. The vines were cutting off her circulation, and she could feel the strength draining from her limbs. She closed her eyes, trying to calm herself. She knew that brute force wouldn't free her. This wasn't a test of strength. It was a test of her mind. The forest had been testing her all along, and she knew she needed to think her way out of this. Amina took a deep breath, forcing herself to relax despite the crushing weight of the vines. She let her mind focus on the lessons her mother had taught her before her passing, the teachings of resilience, of using her wits over sheer force. The vines seemed to pulse with the forest's magic, and Amina realized that they were connected to the life force of the forest itself. If the forest wanted her to prove herself, then she needed to show that she understood its power, not by fighting it, but by working with it. I see you now, Amina whispered to the vines. You are not here to harm me. You're here to test my understanding of balance.
She stopped struggling and instead focused her energy inward. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and envisioned herself in harmony with the forest. Slowly, she began to feel the energy of the vines shift. Their grip loosened ever so slightly, as if they were listening to her, waiting for her to prove that she was in tune with the forest's will. The man watching her frowned, clearly not expecting this change. "What are you doing?" he demanded, stepping closer. But Amina didn't answer. She continued to breathe deeply, calming her mind and allowing herself to synchronize with the forest. In her mind's eye, she imagined the vines unraveling, releasing her of their own accord. She visualized herself free, standing strong and confident once again. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the vines began to loosen their grip. They slid from her arms and legs, retreating back into the earth from which they had come. Amina stood, her body shaking with the effort, but her heart swelling with triumph. The man's eyes widened in shock. "Impossible," he muttered. "No one has ever—" Amina fixed him with a steady gaze. "I told you," she said, her voice strong. "You can't control me. I have passed your test." The man's face twisted in frustration, but he didn't challenge her. He stepped back, his form seeming to shimmer and fade as the shadows of the forest swallowed him up. "You may leave the forest," he said, his voice echoing as he disappeared. "But beware, the outside world may be even more treacherous than this place." Amina watched as the last of the shadows melted away, leaving her alone in the clearing. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her ordeal lifting from her shoulders. She had faced her fears, outsmarted the forest's traps, and proven her strength. Now, at last, she was free to return home. But even as the path before her cleared, a new thought began to form in her mind. If her stepmother had sent her here to die, then what kind of danger awaited her when she returned? The forest might have been treacherous, but she knew Mwanza was just as cunning, and she would be ready for whatever wicked plan her stepmother had in store. With renewed determination, Amina stepped onto the path leading back to her village. The forest that had once felt so threatening now seemed like a place of lessons learned and challenges overcome. But as the trees thinned and the sun broke through the leaves, casting a warm glow on her face, an unsettling thought crossed her mind. What awaited her back home? As she walked, the familiar sounds of the village began to reach her ears. Children laughing, women chatting, and the distant clinking of pots and pans. The comforting cacophony filled her with hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by memories of Mwanza's cold demeanor and the undercurrent of malice in her voice. Approaching her home, Amina hesitated. She recalled the words of the forest's guardian. "Beware, the outside world may be even more treacherous than this place." With her heart racing, she peered through the gate. Everything appeared unchanged, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her stepmother was up to something. Taking a deep breath, Amina pushed the gate open and stepped into the courtyard. It felt surreal to be back, as if the forest had altered her perspective. She spotted Mwanza on the porch, her silhouette stark against the vibrant flowers blooming in the garden. Amina's heart sank. Her stepmother seemed to be waiting for her, an eerie calm enveloping her presence. "Ah, my dear Amina," Mwanza called out, her voice dripping with sweetness. "You're back at last. I was beginning to worry." Amina forced a smile, trying to mask her unease. "I learned many things in the forest, Mwanza," she replied, keeping her tone steady, "and I'm grateful to be home." Mwanza's smile widened, but Amina noticed the slight twitch in her stepmother's jaw. "Home is where you belong, dear. After all, I've made some wonderful plans for us." The last word hung in the air, thick with an unspoken threat. "What kind of plans?" Amina asked cautiously, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "Oh, just a little gathering," Mwanza replied nonchalantly, her eyes glinting with mischief. "I invited a few of the village girls over for tea this afternoon. We can't have you wandering off again, can we? You need to make friends. Be a part of the community." Amina's instincts screamed at her to be wary. Mwanza's gathering felt like a trap, a way to keep her under surveillance. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness, but I'm quite tired from my journey. Perhaps another time?" Amina suggested, hoping to buy herself some time. "Nonsense," Mwanza shot back, her voice suddenly sharp. "You will come and join us, Amina. It's for your own good." Amina's heart raced. The more Mwanza insisted, the more convinced she became that something sinister was afoot. She had outsmarted the forest, but could she outwit her stepmother as well? A plan began to form in her mind. "Of course I'll join you, Mwanza," Amina said, masking her true feelings. "But let me prepare a little surprise for our guests first." Mwanza raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What sort of surprise?" "A special treat I learned to make in the forest," Amina replied, her mind racing. Just a little something to share with everyone? Very well, Mwanza said, her interest piqued. Make it quick, though. I wouldn't want our guests to be kept waiting. As Amina headed to the kitchen, her mind worked furiously. She needed to create a diversion, something that would allow her to uncover Mwanza's plans without raising suspicion. She thought back to the lessons of the forest, where she had learned the importance of balance and strategy. She gathered ingredients for a special herbal tea, infusing it with a blend of the herbs she had discovered during her trials in the forest. But this wasn't just a tea. It was a clever concoction that would keep Mwanza and her guests occupied, giving Amina the chance to search for any evidence of her stepmother's schemes. Once she prepared the tea, Amina poured it into delicate cups, adding a touch of honey for sweetness. When the aroma wafted through the air, she felt a sense of satisfaction. It was time to set her plan into motion. Returning to the porch, Amina placed the tray of tea before Mwanza and the village girls who had gathered, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves. "Here's a little treat for everyone," Amina announced, forcing a smile as she poured the tea. "I hope you enjoy it." Mwanza accepted the cup with a curious glint in her eye, but Amina noticed that her stepmother's smile had a tightness to it. "You've outdone yourself, Amina," she said, sipping the tea. "Delicious!" As the girls around them began to sip the tea, Amina carefully observed Mwanza's reaction. It was time to see if her stepmother had truly been plotting against her. But as laughter and chatter filled the air, Amina's confidence grew. The tea was not only a distraction, it was also a symbol of her strength and resilience. She had learned to face her fears and had outsmarted the challenges the forest had thrown her way. Now, she was ready to uncover the truth behind Mwanza's wicked plans. Amina's heart raced as she recognized the shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the garden. It was none other than her stepmother's henchman, Chaike, the man who had helped Mwanza carry out her cruel schemes. She had thought he was gone for good, banished from their lives after Amina had exposed him in the village. But now he stood there, hidden among the trees, his eyes scanning the gathering as if he were looking for something, or someone. Taking a deep breath, Amina forced herself to stay calm. She had to think quickly. The laughter of the village girls and Mwanza's false compliments filled the air, but Amina's focus was on the threat that loomed just outside her home. She glanced over at Mwanza, who was enjoying her tea, blissfully unaware of the danger at their doorstep. A plan began to form in Amina's mind. If she could draw Chiki into the open, she might finally be able to confront him and expose the truth behind Mwanza's schemes once and for all. "Ladies," Amina said, her voice cheerful, "I have a fun game we can play while we enjoy our tea. Let's have a little storytelling competition. Each of us can share a tale and I'll judge who has the best one." The girls cheered, eager to participate, and Mwanza clapped her hands in delight. "What a wonderful idea, Amina. You always know how to keep things lively," she praised. But there was a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. Amina smiled back, knowing this would give her the opportunity she needed. As the girls began sharing their stories, she watched the edge of the garden intently, waiting for the right moment. As laughter and applause erupted around her, Amina made a move. "I think I'll start us off with a story of bravery," she declared, raising her voice to capture everyone's attention. "This is a tale of a young girl who faced great danger and outsmarted those who wished to harm her." The village girls leaned in, intrigued. "Tell us, Amina," they urged, eager to hear her story. With every word, Amina wove a tale that mirrored her own journey, of trials, courage, and the importance of believing in oneself. As she spoke, she subtly gestured toward the edge of the garden, guiding Chiki's attention toward her. Finally, just as she reached the climax of her story, Amina locked eyes with Chik. And in the end, the girl discovered that she was stronger than she ever imagined. She was able to confront those who sought to deceive her and reveal their true intentions. As if on cue, Chiki stepped into the clearing, drawn in by Amina's powerful words. The laughter and chatter faded into silence as the village girls turned to see the intruder. "Mwanza!" Chiki called out, his voice booming. "I've come to deliver a message!" Mwanza's face paled, her facade slipping as she realized that her past had caught up with her. "What are you doing here, Chik?" she demanded, trying to regain her composure. "I've come to warn you," Chiki said, his gaze fixed on Amina, "that the girl you thought you could break has become a problem. The forest has revealed her true strength, and now she stands ready to expose you for who you really are." The girls gasped, realizing that the stories Amina had shared were not just fiction. Amina stood tall, her heart racing, but she felt empowered by the truth. "I'm not afraid of you, Chica," she declared, her voice steady. "And neither should anyone else be afraid of Mwanza." Mwanza's expression darkened as she tried to regain control of the situation. "You don't understand, Chiki," she hissed. "She's just a child. We can handle this ourselves." But the other village girls had begun to rally around Amina, emboldened by her bravery. "We believe in her," one girl shouted, and soon the others echoed, chanting, "Amina! Amina! Amina!" With their support, Amina felt an unyielding strength surge within her. She stepped forward, confronting both Mwanza and Chiki. "You can no longer threaten me or my future. I know what you've done and what you plan to do. The village will not stand by while you spread your wickedness." Chaik exchanged glances with Mwanza, their alliance cracking under the pressure of Amina's resolve. "You're making a grave mistake, girl," Chaik warned, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "No, the mistake was thinking you could control me," Amina replied, her confidence unwavering. "Today, I'm taking back my life." Just then, the village elders, drawn by the commotion, arrived at the scene. "What is happening here?" one elder asked, his voice commanding attention. Amina took a deep breath, ready to speak the truth. "Elders, this is Mwanza, my wicked stepmother. She has plotted against me and has been deceiving the village." Mwanza's face twisted in fury, but before she could retaliate, Chiki spoke up, his bravado faltering. "It's true," he admitted reluctantly. "We tried to keep her from revealing the truth." The elders looked at each other, stunned. "We will not allow such deceit in our village," one elder proclaimed, stepping forward. "Mwanza, your actions will not go unpunished." As the elders began to speak with the villagers, Amina felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had faced her fears and emerged victorious, supported by those she once believed might turn against her. With Mwanza and Chiki cornered by the elders, Amina took a moment to breathe. She was free, truly free, for the first time since her mother had passed away. She had outsmarted her wicked stepmother and her henchmen, reclaiming her place in the village and the life she deserved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Amina looked at her newfound friends, grateful for their unwavering support. She had learned that true strength lay not just in courage, but in the bonds of community and love.